Bruno had everything money could buy, but in an instant he lost it all. Accustomed to wealth and power, he was forced to work as a cleaner, a profession he deeply despised. But fate had even bigger plans for him. At the most humiliating moment of his life, Bruno met Caroline, his boss, a woman who would completely change the way he saw the world. Would he be able to abandon his pride and find true purpose through love? This inspiring true story proves that sometimes losing everything is exactly what we need to gain what really matters. Bruno was used to a life of absolute luxury. At the age of 28, he had everything he wanted at his fingertips. Money wasn't a problem. On the contrary, it was the solution to everything. Since he was a teenager, he had surrounded himself with sports cars, exclusive parties, and people who admired him only for the fortune he possessed. There was no concern, humility, or empathy in the way he lived. Bruno believed that money determined people's worth, something he cultivated from an early age and never questioned. His routine was simple: waking up late in a huge, extravagantly decorated apartment, having lunch in the most expensive restaurants, and spending the afternoon wandering around designer stores or going on empty dates with equally superficial friends. Bruno made no effort to hide his arrogance. On the contrary, he liked to show it off. When he entered places, he would look down on the employees he considered inferior. He often made disrespectful comments about humble people, considering them failures or lazy for not having achieved what he had with ease. He didn't know the meaning of true effort, as he never had to work hard to achieve his luxurious lifestyle. The fortune he inherited and multiplied by investments he didn't even fully understand had shaped his character and worldview. However, Bruno didn't imagine that this comfortable life could disappear from one moment to the next, that fate was preparing a sudden and inevitable turnaround, ready to drastically change his way of life. One seemingly ordinary morning, Bruno received an urgent call from Daniel, his financial advisor, who had been looking after the family's accounts and investments for a long time. For the first time, he noticed an unusual nervous and worried tone in his voice. Daniel asked to meet him in person, insisting that the situation was too serious for a telephone conversation. Initially irritated by the interruption to his carefree routine, Bruno agreed to meet him at his apartment. When he arrived, Daniel didn't disguise his tension. He informed Bruno that a high-risk investment made against his advice months earlier had gone completely wrong. Bruno had insisted on putting practically the entire family fortune into that single business, lured by unrealistic promises of astronomical returns. The result was catastrophic, leading to the total loss of his financial assets. Daniel made it clear that there was no way of reversing the situation. In a single instant, Bruno realized that he was bankrupt, with absolutely nothing to sustain the life of ostentation he loved so much. Paralyzed by shock, Bruno felt suffocated by the weight of the reality he was now facing. The walls of that luxurious apartment, which had always protected him from the real world, now seemed too narrow. The silence became deafening as he watched, without reaction, Daniel leave after expressing his condolences. Sitting on the sofa, his head between his trembling hands, Bruno faced for the first time the terror of not knowing what to do or where to go. His usual arrogance quickly evaporated, replaced by a deep, despairing emptiness. For the first time in his life, he felt truly powerless in the face of the reality he had always ignored. After weeks of searching unsuccessfully for an easy solution to his financial crisis, Bruno had to face the harsh reality of accepting any job available. He had never experienced the need to look for a job. In fact, he didn't even know how to start. Pride prevented him from asking his old friends for help, who had now disappeared as quickly as the money had vanished. With no alternative, he found a simple ad offering an urgent vacancy for a cleaner in a commercial building. He initially resisted the idea, thinking it too absurd, but hunger and overdue bills soon overcame his hesitation. When he presented himself for the interview, Bruno felt humiliated from the first moment. He wore simple, discreet clothes, trying to go unnoticed so that no one would recognize him. When he entered the building, he had to control his usual arrogance, feeling inferior for the first time in his life as he observed the bustling, indifferent people around him. The interview was short, awkward, and to the point. The person in charge barely looked at him, asking quick questions about his availability for cleaning and flexible hours. Left with no alternative, Bruno immediately accepted all the conditions imposed and took up the job on the spot. His first day at work was even more difficult than he had imagined. He was given instructions on how to clean bathrooms, offices and corridors, tasks he had previously despised. Every move felt like a blow to her former self-esteem. While scrubbing floors, he avoided eye contact with people, afraid of being recognized by someone from his luxurious past. Every minute he spent doing this task, he felt his dignity being tested like never before. In the middle of the day, physically exhausted and emotionally shaken, he thought about giving up several times, but remembered that he had no other options. It was then that he heard a firm but gentle voice behind him. He turned and saw Caroline for the first time, tall, elegant-looking, with a firm, determined gaze, but with a warm smile. She was in charge of the cleaning team and seemed to have noticed Bruno's obvious discomfort. She calmly instructed him on how to use the cleaning products correctly, showing patience as she explained basic techniques that he had never imagined he would need to learn. Bruno was surprised by the delicacy with which she gave him instructions, something she had never shown to any of her previous employees. During breaks, Caroline made a point of approaching the employees, including Bruno, asking if they were all right and if they needed anything. Bruno, embarrassed at first, responded only with monosyllables, trying to hide his discomfort, but gradually felt a strange sense of comfort in front of her. Caroline showed respect and genuine consideration, something completely new for Bruno, who had previously been treated with false or distant interest. At the end of the day, already exhausted, Bruno took off his uniform with a heavy feeling of humiliation mixed with unexpected gratitude for the kind words Caroline had spoken to him during that difficult day. As he made his way home that late afternoon, walking through the streets that he had previously only crossed in expensive cars, Bruno began to reflect deeply on his situation. Despite the shame he still felt about his job, he couldn't get Caroline's warm and understanding image out of his head. For the first time since his fall, he felt that it might be possible to survive this new reality if he had someone by his side who was able to see value even in the small, humble actions of everyday life. As the days went by, Bruno slowly began to adapt to the job he had hated so much at the beginning. There were still moments when he felt embarrassed, especially when he met elegant people in the corridors of the building. But the daily interaction with his new co-workers made him realize something completely unexpected. For the first time, Bruno was surrounded by people who showed genuine happiness, despite the difficulties they faced on a daily basis. This sincere simplicity was something he had never understood before, used to a world where happiness always seemed to be conditional on the possession of material goods or social status. Living together wasn't easy at first. Bruno couldn't completely hide his discomfort, nor his lack of skill in the most basic tasks, which inevitably caused discreet laughter among his colleagues. Gradually, however, he realized that the laughter was not malicious, but a light-hearted way of coping with their tiring daily lives. Observing them closely, Bruno noticed that many of them had large families, modest dreams, and a determination that he himself had never experienced. Still feeling out of place, he began to ask more about their lives and discovered stories of overcoming that touched his heart deeply, although he still resisted admitting it openly. During lunch breaks, Bruno began to sit shyly with the group, something he had never imagined doing before. Between simple sandwiches and relaxed laughter, he listened to stories involving real challenges and daily struggles, unlike anything he had ever experienced. he realized, with growing emotional discomfort, how unfair and superficial he had been in his previous judgments of humbler people. With each conversation, Bruno felt closer to his colleagues, developing a silent admiration for the strength and resilience they showed, despite adversity. However, it was Caroline who most influenced his internal transformation. Always present, she seemed to notice with precision every emotional breakthrough he made, offering him support in times of difficulty. During one particularly exhausting afternoon, when Bruno couldn't hide his frustration at not completing a simple task correctly, Caroline approached him with a warm gaze, offering to help him. Initially reluctant, Bruno accepted with some embarrassment, and soon realized that more than teaching him how to do a task well, Caroline was teaching him to be patient with himself and to recognize that making mistakes was part of the process of growing up. After work that same day, while they were collecting the cleaning materials together, Caroline took advantage of the quiet moment to talk to Bruno in a more personal way. Without invading his privacy, she told him about her own career, explaining that she had also experienced financial difficulties years ago and that she had learned to appreciate every small daily victory. Bruno listened attentively, surprised to realize that someone so apparently secure and confident could have faced similar challenges to those he was now experiencing. Caroline's words had an almost therapeutic effect, and Bruno found himself opening up emotionally for the first time. On returning home that evening, Bruno reflected deeply on what he was experiencing. The humiliating feeling that had previously dominated his thoughts gradually gave way to an unexpected gratitude for the transformative experience he was going through. Caroline's words and actions, especially her emotional generosity, echoed in his mind. Bruno clearly realized for the first time that the initial admiration he felt for her was slowly transforming into something greater, something deeper, something that simultaneously frightened and comforted him. After weeks immersed in this new reality, Bruno began to notice significant changes within himself. The initial feeling of shame had given way to a growing curiosity about what he could still learn from this unexpected situation. More importantly, the daily work routine, which had previously seemed humiliating and unbearable, was slowly becoming a real opportunity for personal growth. He noticed that for the first time, his actions had visible and immediate consequences, something that before, in his old life full of excesses, he had rarely noticed. Bruno began to find satisfaction in small, everyday victories. Each task done correctly, each sincere compliment received from colleagues, or Caroline reinforced his slowly rebuilding confidence. The simple pleasure of finishing an impeccable clean in a room, of perfectly organizing an environment, or even the feeling of honest physical tiredness at the end of the day became unexpectedly rewarding experiences for him. This new perspective opened his eyes to the fact that valuing humble work was not only possible, but deeply rewarding. In the midst of these changes, Bruno began to question himself about the man he had been before. The memory of his past arrogance now brought a feeling of deep discomfort. He remembered times when he had treated people with contempt simply because of their social or financial position, and this now filled him with shame and regret. More and more, Bruno understood clearly that his old worldview was not only wrong, but also unfair and empty. This realization was difficult and painful, but deeply liberating. Caroline's constant presence played a key role in this change. The more I observed her, the more admiration I felt for her genuine and humble way of dealing with the people around her. Caroline had the rare ability to see value in others, regardless of status or position. Little by little, Bruno realized that his feelings for her went beyond simple admiration or gratitude. His heart raced whenever he saw her coming to work, and he felt strangely motivated by the idea of impressing her with his dedication to his work and his growing humility. Bruno was surprised to find himself during his working days, trying to anticipate the team's needs, especially Caroline's, in order to make the environment more pleasant. Small gestures like arriving early, organizing materials before the rest of his colleagues arrived, or even offering to help someone who looked tired came naturally to him. It didn't take long for Caroline to notice this sincere change in his attitude, and their conversations began to take place more frequently and in greater depth. One quiet afternoon, Caroline approached Bruno while he was completing a simple task, but one he had done with remarkable dedication. With a warm smile, she told him that she was proud of how much he had developed in a short time. Bruno felt overwhelmed by an immense and unexpected joy. That sincere approval, coming from the woman he deeply admired, made him realize definitively that his feelings for her were already much greater than he would have liked to admit to himself. That evening, as he walked slowly home under a starry sky, Bruno reflected intensely on his emotions. There was no longer any doubt in his heart. He was truly in love with Caroline. For the first time, however, he felt something different from the usual selfishness of his past relationships. It was a pure feeling, based on respect, admiration, and sincerity. Frightened and fascinated by this discovery, Bruno promised himself that he would do everything to become worthy of the love of someone as special as Caroline. In the midst of the process of personal and emotional reconstruction he had been going through, Bruno received an unexpected phone call that shook his equilibrium once again. It was Daniel, his former financial advisor, who had some surprising news. An influential company associated with one of Bruno's old friends had learned of his current situation and was willing to help him recover his lost fortune by offering him an executive position with an extremely generous salary. For Bruno, this meant not only the opportunity to return to the luxurious life he had abruptly abandoned, but also the chance to regain his former social position, something he believed he had already accepted, losing forever. The offer, however, had clear and uncomfortable conditions. In order to accept it, Bruno would have to immediately quit his job as a cleaner, permanently distance himself from the humble colleagues with whom he had begun to form strong bonds, and above all, break off all contact with Caroline, whose influence the executives deemed inappropriate for his new position. The idea of leaving behind the woman he had fallen deeply in love with immediately bothered him. For the first time, Bruno felt torn not by the money itself, but by the real possibility of hurting the people who had become so important to him in recent months. For days, Bruno was tormented by indecision. Each morning seemed harder to face. Knowing that he would have to make a decision soon, looking at his colleagues at work, he felt a deep guilt just for considering leaving them in exchange for money and status. Even more painful was the thought of abandoning Caroline. She had believed in him when no one else did, recognizing his true potential long before he could see it himself. Betraying her felt unbearably wrong, almost a negation of everything he had learned from her so far. On a particularly harrowing night, Bruno decided to walk through the silent streets, seeking clarity for his turbulent thoughts. As he walked slowly, he reflected deeply on everything he had experienced over the last few weeks. He realized that his true happiness didn't lie in the material wealth he had once thought essential, but in the sense of genuine belonging he felt with his new friends and, above all, with Caroline. The idea of going back to his old life, now empty and superficial in his eyes, seemed more like a prison than a liberation. The next day, he decided to talk to Caroline about it before making his final decision. He met her during a work break and told her honestly about the offer he had received, also revealing the conditions imposed by the executives. Caroline listened attentively, calm despite the impact of the news. At the end of Bruno's account, she took a deep breath and said with gentle firmness that the decision was entirely his, but advised him to think about whether it would really make him happy or just be a return to the emotional prison from which he was beginning to free himself. After the frank conversation with Caroline, Bruno returned home with a lighter heart and a clear mind. There was no longer any doubt. The arrogant, superficial man he had been was gone. Now he knew exactly what he had to do. He picked up the phone and called Daniel directly, telling him his final decision with a newfound certainty in his voice. He firmly rejected the proposal, stating that he did not intend to give up the people and values he had finally won, especially Carolyn, whose respect and admiration were now more valuable to him than any fortune could ever be. That night, as Bruno lay down to sleep, he felt a deep and unexpected peace. Despite the apparent folly of turning down an offer that could give him back everything he once had, he felt completely sure of his choice. He knew he had done the right thing, not only for himself, but also for the people who now filled his heart with something infinitely more valuable than any money could buy: true and sincere love. After turning down that tempting offer, Bruno felt lighter and more sure of his choices than ever. The following days became especially intense for him. He watched Caroline discreetly as she worked, noticing every little detail that made her so special. His admiration had grown to the point of becoming almost unbearable. He was completely in love, something he had never felt with such intensity and sincerity. However, he also knew that he needed to reveal his feelings as soon as possible. Keeping them to himself was starting to become painful, especially now that he was sure of his own emotions. Determined to open up, Bruno waited until the end of a quiet working day to talk to Carolyn. His heart raced as he waited patiently for all his colleagues to leave, leaving him alone. When he finally saw her organizing the last of the day's materials, he approached her slowly, breathing deeply to control his nervousness. Caroline noticed his serious expression and softly asked if everything was all right. It was the impetus Bruno needed to reveal everything he had been feeling. With unprecedented sincerity, Bruno confessed his feelings with a clarity and vulnerability he had never shown before. He told